作者陸雪兒，英文名 Susan，而家喺多倫多大學讀緊數據，不過好快就會轉讀廣告，因為我覺得廣告比較適合我開朗而活力嘅性格。唔係好多人知道，其實我喺加拿大出世。In fact, I was born right here in Toronto. When it comes to hobbies, my favorite pastime is surfing the internet. Why do I surf the internet so often? It's because I needed to stay connected to school, to work, and just to keep in touch with friends. As you can see, my homepage is saved to Toronto TV. Why? Because I watch Toronto TV every day so that I can keep connected to the Toronto Chinese community. It's always fun to see what new events are organized by people in our community. And when I watch it, it makes me feel like I'm a part of it too. 多倫多網上電視記者陸雪兒現場報導。Toronto TV, connecting you with your community, connecting you and me.
So what's your response about the auditor's report?
Well, I think the auditor's report shows a disgraceful lack of respect for the taxpayers' money by Mr. McGuinty and his government. They've now had a minister resign because they literally have just shoveled tens of millions of dollars out the door without any care at all. Taxpayers work hard for their money. There are people out there waiting for health care or waiting for help for daycare or waiting for home care for their parents, the elderly parents, who don't have any money, and they see Mr. McGuinty handing out millions of dollars to groups that didn't even ask for money. And so I think it's just a disgrace, and we're going to get to the bottom of it when we form the government and do a much better job of respecting the taxpayers' money, which I think is what you're there to do.
I see your message saying your party audited to do all every item in the year-end spending. Is that right?
Well, Mr. McGuinty's government over the last 2 years have spent billions of dollars, more than $2 billion in the last few weeks of each year. And the auditor has commented before and said that money that was spent, the billions of dollars, were not spent with proper controls. And now that we've looked at 32 million, just a tiny tip of the iceberg, and he's found all kinds of problems and disrespect for taxpayers' money, I think it's important now that we look at the rest of the 2.4 billion and see how much of that was sent out without paperwork, without questions, and find out how much of that might have been improperly handled by Mr. McGuinty and his government. So yes, I'd ask that the rest of the money be examined by the auditor.
Does the report show that any organization received the money they misused those funds? Or is that
No, I haven't seen any indication in the report that anybody misused the funds. That was never the issue. The issue was never about who got the money or what they did with it. The issue is always about how they got the money. And in this case, the report indicated that the only way you get the money is if you knew the minister and could have a personal conversation with him. There was no application form. There was no review committee. There was no involvement by anybody other than politicians. And so that's the issue here. There is no suggestion anybody misused the money. There's a very odd story as part of the report where the Cricket Association asked for $150,000 and got $1 million. And I don't know why that would happen because we're so short of money for health care and for education. I don't know why they'd give away more money than someone asked for. But there was no suggestion anybody did anything bad with the money.
so what needs to be done to correct this thing?
I think it has to start with a change of government because Mr. McGuinty over and over again has been found to be wasting money on changing logos for the Lottery Corporation, on paying all kinds of consultants a lot of money, on big ad campaigns that are misleading. And now we see this money that was just kind of sent out the door, no questions asked. So I think we probably have to change the government to somebody like me who had a career in business, that I understand that every dollar that you're sent by the taxpayers is a dollar that is precious money they worked hard to earn, and that they expect you to treat it with respect. And I understand that because of my business background, and I think that's what we have to do is get greater accountability, which I'm committed to doing if I get elected.
So we all know that the federal Liberal government was overturned because of the scandal. Do you think that this example will happen in Ontario again?
I think people are going to remember that Mr. McGuinty took no care with their money, and that the Auditor General of Ontario, who is an objective person, he's not partisan, he found that the taxpayers' money was treated with disrespect by Mr. McGuinty. And I think that people will remember that because I think they really work hard for their money. They really care that the government spends it on important things like healthcare and farmers and education, and not waste it or not send it out without asking the right kinds of questions. And that's what happened here. There were just money sent out, millions of dollars, without any questions being asked at all.
McKinsey said today that he's looking at taking back the money. What do you think?
I think that in the case of many of these groups, they're good groups, they're doing good things, and there was never an argument about that. And so I think unless it's established that somebody was doing something wrong with the money, they should have a look at it. I think when there's a group that got way more than they asked for and they have it sitting in the bank, they might say to them, well, if you don't need it now, you can apply again later. But I don't think there's any suggestion these groups did anything wrong. I think what is wrong here is that the Auditor General found Mr. McGuinty sent out the money without anybody filling out a proper application, nobody asking any questions, nobody knowing what was done with the money. So in many cases the money will have been spent, and I think it would be unfair to ask one group to give it back and not the other, unless there's some suggestion that somebody either never needed it or that they did something improper with it. And I've not heard any suggestion like that, except for, pardon me, the cricket organization, where they got 8 times more than they asked for, or 7 times more.
Would that create any confusion for those associations?
Well, that's why I think it would. I think they should go out and perhaps sit down and have a talk with them, but I think the objective should be just to sort of inquire about what was done with the money, see if it was used. If some of them said, for example, they just didn't need it at all and never did, well, then maybe they would give it back and they could always reapply later. But the notion that you're going to go and demand the money back from these people if they've used it in good faith, I don't think these groups did anything wrong. I think it was the government that did something wrong by kind of having this terrible process of disrespect for taxpayers' money and lack of accountability that Mr. McGuinty designed. I think that was where the mistake was. So I think it's worth going and asking them, but I wouldn't sort of be trying to sort of push too hard to get it back in most cases, because I think they probably have something they're going to do with it.
What do you think McKinsey should do to correct this wrong?
I've suggested that you have to make sure anytime you have money available that you make it known on the internet to everybody, so everybody knows there's money, so anybody can apply. The second thing you have to do is make sure there's a proper application process, so you don't just give it to your friends. The third thing I think you need to do is make sure that every single time that you spend money like this, you go and look afterwards at what was done to make sure that you got what the people said you would get. And finally, I think all of these grants should be reviewed by somebody that is not a politician. So they should be looked at by a public servant or some other person to make sure politics is not involved. There's no place for politics in the granting of this money.
So taking back the money isn't right?
Well, I just think in some cases, what if they've spent half of it? And what if they spent half of it for a very good purpose, where they've done something very good with the money? The fault was with the government on the application process, not with the groups. The groups didn't know any better. I mean, they just knew you had to phone the minister and get money. But in many cases, the money, I'm sure, was being asked for perfectly legitimate purposes. So I just think that, sure, we should sit down with them, and if they all have it sitting in the bank and they haven't spent it and never needed it, didn't want it, well, then maybe they could give it back. But I wouldn't make a big deal of that, because I think that it may be very unfair to these groups who just did what they thought was necessary when they understood that the minister was handing out money.
We need your comment about this. Some of the directors in the money receiving organization, they do come to the Liberal fundraising party. Do you think that is appropriate?
Well, as the Auditor General said, because there was no other process, it looked bad. It looked bad. And if all of these organizations had filled out a proper application form about their finances and how long they've existed and what work they did and what they were going to do with the money and sent in their latest financial statement, I don't think anybody would care that there were some Liberals involved in the board of directors. But when the only thing we had was a conversation with the Liberal minister and a bunch of people on the board who were Liberal fundraising helpers, it looks bad, and the auditor said that. So that's why we need to fix the process, and that's why the auditor said it was a very bad perception that was created by the fact that these Liberals were all involved. But he found no wrongdoing, and I would accept his conclusions in that regard. Thanks for coming over this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.